Thanks very much, guys, for having me here today. I must say, with all these very kind of high-profile, capable international and local speakers, I feel a bit like the guy at the zoo who has to kind of clean up after the elephant. But anyway, I'll do my best. And I guess the story that I'm going to tell you today actually started with an internal story about strategy that we actually developed within our own business, and felt that it was a good story to tell. And we've been kind of telling versions of the story over the last few months, really because we believe in it. And I guess it's kind of a bringing together of some thoughts that we have about where the world's going and some of the questions that we're asking in order to stay relevant. So my hope for today is that my story gives you a view of the world that's maybe a little bit different to the view that you currently have, and that it motivates you to think differently and to start asking questions that will position you to be really successful over the next 5 or 10 years. I think a time in which we're going to see really profound change, not only for businesses, but for humanity. And I think the range of possibilities that we're going to see over the next few years is really going to be quite remarkable. So why now? Why do I think that there's a tipping point right now? And I think in reality, it's a function of 3 big drivers that are coming together in a way where 1 times 1 times 1 is equal to 50 and beyond. And I think there are really 3 big factors that we need to bear in mind. So the first is digital technology. So all of these things on their own are not going to be new to any of you, but really digital technology is multiplying at a rate at an exponential rate and shows no real sign of slacking off anytime soon. The second is that data is really exploding, and for the first time, we're starting to find ways to turn that data into economic value. And finally, most ideas actually build on the shoulders of previous ideas, and more people are now able to access those ideas. And so the opportunity when you put all of this together is actually quite profound. To put this in context, it's worth kind of really understanding the power of doubling. And this is really kind of at the core of my idea. And so to give you a sense of really what the power of doubling means, I'd just like to quickly tell you the story of the invention of chess, or the legend of the invention of chess. But the story goes that the inventor of chess took his story to the ruler of India, who was so impressed that he told the inventor that he could name his reward. And the inventor, being a smart guy, smarter than the ruler, asked to be paid in wheat, with 1 grain on the first square of the chessboard, doubling for every square thereafter. And the ruler kind of figured he had got a bargain, but by the time you get to the 64th square on the chessboard, the pile of wheat is bigger than Mount Everest. True story. So depending on which version of the story you believe, the inventor apparently had his head chopped off or became the ruler. What's interesting is Moore's law, which all of you know, has been around really since the mid-60s. And to start with, the cycle actually flipped over every 12 months. So what most of us don't realize, we understand that things get faster and cheaper every 18 months. What we don't realize is that we're into the 40th iteration now, plus, of Moore's law. So the absolute change every time a new processor comes out is way beyond what any of us actually can comprehend. And what's actually really scary is that a similar law holds for multiple other technologies, like storage, like bandwidth, like digital imagery. So pretty much everything digital is getting better, faster, cheaper every kind of 18 to 24 months. And so as prices come down and capabilities go up, we're seeing a real proliferation of devices, from smartphones to sensors, and a whole lot of applications that as little as 5 years ago were impossible, are now very much possible. And in fact, the cost of these things is tending to zero. We're starting to see things like sensors that you can spray onto fruit trees that are not only capable of checking the nutrition in the tree, but also actually broadcasting and transmitting back to a central station the fact that the tree needs water. So this kind of gets us to the reality of big data. And a lot of people have talked about big data. I like this definition from Dan Ariely, which is that big data is like teenage sex. No one really knows what it is, but everyone's talking about it. So to be part of the crowd, you've got to pretend that you're doing it. But for me, it's really all about people. And I think we've had some far more impressive speakers than me today. And I think the the theme holds, which is really what big data is. It's about the breadcrumbs that people leave behind. It's all the little interactions that we have. It's our cell phones connecting with cell phone towers. It's us going into parking garages. It's phone calls that we make. It's tweets. It's Facebook posts. And really, all of these breadcrumbs are trails that we leave that companies can follow in order to track where we are and to give us stuff that we actually need. So a nice analogy for me is Hansel and Gretel leaving the trail of breadcrumbs through the woods. And as businesses, we have an opportunity to follow them and give them what they need. And what's really interesting, particularly for someone who is a data entrepreneur who believes in the power of data, is that this is really happening in the developing world too. And of the world's current mobile phone subscription base, about 75% is in the developing world. And within 3 or 4 years, a lot of those phones are going to be smartphones. So suddenly you're going to have data being produced at an unprecedented rate in places where currently there's no credible data. And that creates an enormous number of opportunities for people like me. That then brings us to what people call the Internet of Everything. So the Internet of Things is all these connected devices. But when you add to that people and the trails that they leave behind, we get to what Cisco calls the Internet of Everything. And this is going to bring an enormous amount of opportunity. It's going to create enormous volumes of data. I think some of the stuff that we'll hear later and that we have heard today means that software as a service is available in a way that makes it very cheap to access these things. And I think the potential for us to solve really important problems is unprecedented. Metcalfe's law might be a law that you don't know as well as Moore's law, but very simply, and referring back to the previous slide, it talks to the power of networks. And really what it means is that the power of a network grows exponentially with each new node that's added to the network. Make sense? So if you think about it, you've got 100 nodes in a network. If you add one node, you potentially add 101 new connections. So what it means is that existing networks, existing large networks, are most likely, almost inevitably, going to grow faster than any emerging network. And that really talks to the value of things like WhatsApp and Facebook and Twitter, where you get these crazy valuations. The reality is with networks, once a horse is a winning horse, it's likely to stay a winning horse. Really what that means for all of us is when stuff is happening outside your firm and it's part of a network, you need to try and use that network rather than to try and compete with the network. So you've got all this data exploding. You've got technology that's really fast. And you've got lots and lots of people coming online. And so suddenly all of these ideas are accessible to a whole lot of people. And I like a quote from Austin Kleon in his book, Steal Like an Artist, where he says, it's only plagiarism if you only steal one idea. Because in reality, there are so many great ideas out there. We all have access to them. We all know our own context. If we can put great ideas together, make them work using technology, we can solve lots of big problems in a really, really simple way. And what's interesting is more and more people are tapping in. So for the people that have access to these ideas today, that's growing at an unprecedented rate. And when you look at the volume of people that are already online, and you understand that in the developing world, people are coming online via mobile devices at a rate which has really doubled in the last year, you really do get a sense of the number of people that are going to be able to access these ideas over the next few years. So why do I think this is so important? Why we've all lived through this digital age. What makes it different? I guess it's just been inevitable. We're at a point in time where the absolute rate of change is just something that we are going to be hit with. It really started in the 60s. And in reality, if you think about getting back to the chessboard story, if you believe that humanity's created a pile of capability, of data, of technological capability and ideas the size of Mount Everest, imagine that by the next World Cup, or just beyond that, 54 months from now, we're going to have a pile that's equivalent to 7 Mount Everests. So what do you do with that? What do you do with that as an individual? What do you do with that as an organization? And for me, it's very, very hard to predict. I think the days of 5-year plans and detailed business plans are gone. My view is we need to keep calm and ask questions. And so what I've done, I think the questions are different for all organizations, but I've had a go at coming up with a few questions that I think are worth asking. So the first really refers to strategy. I had a prior to getting into the tech space, I was involved in strategy consulting for a while. Quite glad I'm not there now. I think things are changing so fast that it's a really, really difficult industry to be in. But what are the constraints that were there 2 years ago that stopped you from doing stuff? Are they still relevant? You know, how do you negotiate with buyers and suppliers in a world where everyone has all the information? What happens to legacy sources of advantage like scale and data centers? You know, all of that's gone. Do we need to be investing in disruptive startups? The war for talent. We're in a time where particularly talented people want autonomy and purpose. A great knowledge worker is worth 10 times a mediocre knowledge worker, who in turn is worth 10 times a bad knowledge worker. You guys all want knowledge workers. Where are you looking for them? How are you going to excite them? How are you going to retain them? The breadcrumbs. All of us have customers, one way or another. What breadcrumbs are they leaving for you? How are you going to reward them for sharing that information with you? What are you going to do differently as a result of knowing more about what they do, where they shop, and how they operate? But really, in a world where most consumers are going to have smartphones equivalent to an iPhone 5 in 3 years' time, and I'm talking prepaid phones, how are you going to operate differently? You know, what are you going to do differently to communicate with them? How are you going to create value for them in return for sharing their data? What do you do when price discovery is really easy and all the data is available all the time? Data science. Data science, there's been a lot of talk about data science. I'm sure I don't need to talk too much more about this. But in my view, data science is really a critical component of any business that wants to be meaningful and important over the next 10 years or so. So what are some of the things that you would do with data if you could get all the data that you needed? What are the drivers of your business where if you could predict them, you would do things differently? Because I think what you're going to find is that a lot of stuff that's not been possible in the past is going to be critical in the future. And it's worth really applying your minds to the things that you do manually now that you could solve analytically in the future. Another is bringing in the crowd. I talked about this explosion of networks and the fact that fundamentally networks grow faster outside the firm than inside the firm. Also the fact that it's so easy to get people to do stuff for you anywhere in the world now. So what are the things that your business does where you could do them better outside the crowd or cheaper, outside the firm or cheaper outside the firm? And are you thinking about those things? Because I think the days of organizational boundaries where you try and do everything internally and you try and keep it secret are a thing of the past, or certainly they will be very soon. So in summary, if you don't want to be a dodo, and in fact, if you want to really thrive, I think there are 5 points to bear in mind. Firstly, the world is changing at a pace that none of us really comprehend. And I really believe that we don't appreciate how fast things are changing. The second is that the old constraints, the things that stopped us from doing things in the past, in my view, need to be examined very carefully, because I think that there are a lot of things that we haven't done in the past that were impossible that are now actually critical to stay ahead, and if we do it well, we can really outcompete our competition. We must think laterally and quickly to keep up, so the way of doing things, the old ways of doing things, I think need to be challenged. I think organization design, what happens inside your firm, how you work, your org structure, need to be thought about very carefully, and I think particularly the war for talent is going to change. And finally, I think that to the winners will go massive spoils. I think we're in a time where our industry is the industry to be in. I think where massive value is going to be created, and I'm really excited about what the next 10 years holds. So that's it from me. It's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine. Thank you.